Hello and welcome to Geek Warning, the podcast that puts the world's most interesting cycling tech into one place, or one pod. I'm Dave Rome. Joining me this week, once again, Brad Copeland. Brad, hello, good to see you.
Excited to be here, Dave. We have a lot to discuss this week.
We sure do. And you've had a busy week. You've been in the midst of moving. What's going on? You're currently in Pennsylvania. Where you headed to?
A transition. I'm in a transitional state. Yeah, I'm gonna be in DC like half the time. Washington DC for my international, non-regional followers on this podcast. Our nation's capital. Working in a different shop there. My longtime colleague. I think he's been mentioned on our podcast at least twice, probably. He's he's often one that comes up as the contributor to Corrections Corner. yeah. Which is where he belongs, in Corrections Corner. But Greg Thomas, he's a former colleague of mine for many years and a longtime friend and what should we say, consultant and everything else. But one of the best mechanics I've known throughout all my different phases of life as a bicycle mechanic. And my wife just finished her PhD defense, and she has a postdoctoral fellowship in DC. So Greg and I decided to align once again and combine forces in the DC area. So if you're in the DC metro area or surrounding area, feel free to look us up. I should be with him on a more regular basis in about 2 weeks, but we're kind of having a soft launch this weekend together when I start working and moving in. Yeah.
And not necessarily selling bikes, just fixing them?
Exactly. It's like a high-end service shop. And
nice.
I would imagine that with all the direct-to-consumer brands and ones that are going that way, there's still new bikes being assembled, but just not in the traditional way in a bike shop. But that kind of eliminates one. What I always felt was a distraction from the bike shop as a mechanic. I always thought the most important stuff going on was happening in the workshop, which is not always agreed upon depending on which person in the shop you ask. But
absolutely,
some shops are more service focused, some only do service, and some kind of focus on sales. And I think the way the industry is going, those service only or primarily service based shops are really the ones that are going to kind of be, I would say, stable as we see some current industry trends that are leaving some shops high and dry and making it kind of a tough market for especially small shops.
It's hard to sell a bike at the moment.
It is hard to sell a bike. I'm trying to sell some used bikes right now of my own that I can't even, I mean, the prices I'm lowering it to, I'm like, I should just keep it at this point. But anyway, it's ebb and flow.
So I mean, we've had a pretty busy week once again of in the world of bikes. We've had the Tour de France Femmes of Zwift come to a close, an exciting close, nonetheless. It was the closest finish of any Tour de France ever. And I guess with that, we didn't actually see any new tech of note that stood out to either of us. And so we don't really have much to add there. But I guess the lack of tech is worth discussing because it's now such a prominent event on the calendar that it would be great to see a brand hold off on releasing a new bike and keep it for this event rather than rush it out for the men's event earlier in the calendar. Yeah.
It's something I would be surprised if it didn't happen sooner or later. It's kind of a shame that so many of these brands, only really Giant with their Live offshoot comes to mind as a brand that still has like a women's brand. Specialized used to have one but stopped.
Trek too,
exactly. The big ones all did and then they all stopped except for Giant, whose Live brand lives on. That was kind of a Dave joke there.
Sorry,
but so with that, maybe that makes.
Wait, why am I apologizing for your joke?
I don't know. You should apologize for your own jokes sometimes, though. But
true.
Yeah, we'll see if Live can deliver. See that deliver on expectations, since they're the sole surviving women's pseudo brand left, I would say. But it certainly it was an exciting race. The last stage in particular was actually quite a nail biter, but it was exciting throughout, and I think it got a lot of it was well viewed, and so the value as a platform to debut anything, especially with a lot of the women's kind of the more prominent women athletes who are kind of the stars right now are quite compelling, I think, in their own individual respects, regardless of team affiliation or anything like that. They're definitely, stars outright in the sport, regardless of male or female or whatever. So it's hard to imagine why a brand wouldn't want to align in such a way. So we'll see. Yeah. But yeah, it was a great race, and it was very entertaining. So let's see if the brands that support it can kind of capitalize on that.
I will give a shout out to my colleague Abby Mickey and co for all of their work over the last couple of weeks covering the event, and their podcast, The Wheel Talk, is certainly worth a follow. We got quite a bit of feedback from professional commentators, a lot of industry people that said they listen to the podcast and for various reasons can't say as much in public that they listen because they often have competing products themselves. But when you hear from commentary crews saying, "Oh, we listen to that podcast to inform us what we say during the day," then it's saying some good things. So yeah, for anyone that missed it, it's worth a follow from here on out, or even just to catch up on what you missed. But anyway, hopefully next year we see some brands save some of the good tech and keep us bike nerds. Give us something to look at this event. So, all right. New on for this week. It came out basically 24 hours within us recording last week's episode, so a little slow to this one. But chain wax, Brad, your favorite topic. I shouldn't say it like that because you actually really have quite a bit of experience, and when required, you're not a fan of chain wax. But Silca have released more chips, and they're not the edible kind, but they've got different additives that you can add into your wax pot to achieve different things. So they have a speed chip and an endurance chip, and they basically aim to do almost opposite things. So as the name suggests, the speed chip, you add it into the wax, it makes the wax faster, but less long lasting. And the endurance chip, you add it in, it makes the wax longer lasting, but less fast. These things look kind of interesting, and it comes from the idea that, the Silca wax is different blends of wax. It's not just paraffin, and these additives are kind of playing with how that wax is balanced. At the moment, if you can imagine the stock Silca wax that you buy in a bag is kind of just takes a middle ground between the speed and endurance and kind of tries to keep everyone happy, but this way they can allow a team to add one of these chips in and make a wax that's great for like a 50k time trial that's maybe 1 to 1.5 watts faster. And then alternatively, they're claiming that you can make a chain so durable with its wax that it'll last like 800 miles, which truthfully seems too good to be true. And my personal experience has always been that the wax lasts approximately half as long as the max claimed, but still 400 miles is pretty amazing.
So that's on one treatment, is that right?
Yeah.
Yep. That's quite a claim.
Yep. So a little bit slower, but we're still talking about marginal watts lossage for over such a period. But
did you say watt sausage?
I don't know what I said.
A marginal
it's very early in the morning
sausage?
Here. It's very early in the morning here.
This makes me actually think back to last week's Ask a Wrench question, Dave. If you remember, we were asked a question about using immersion wax as a cyclocross chain wax in bad conditions, and I would wonder maybe if that endurance formula might suit a sort of imperfect conditions and hold up a little bit better and last a little bit longer than some other options, and it might be worth pursuing that thought as well as a potential use.
I saw this question come up on Silca's social media, which was, does that endurance wax improve the wet weather performance of the wax? And it does. I think Silca said something like a 10 to 20% improvement in the wet with this, but they said it's still not enough of an improvement that they're willing to call it a wet weather product, and that they're still trying to solve that problem, which is very intriguing. It sounds like they're probably working on a wet day wax, which is quite cool. But at the very least, it does sound like it'll be an improvement for those regularly wanting to run submersion wax in the rain and in harsh conditions. So certainly check out these endurance chips. They're not cheap, but the thing to know is that once you add it to the wax is then permanently adapted to that. So it's a kind of a one-time use, a one-time expense, should I say? And if it does extend the longevity of your wax between applications by double, then that's probably money well spent. So I haven't used them yet, but I plan to. I'll be using the endurance chip because I don't really care about saving a watt and then having to re-wax my chain twice as frequently. I'm much more at the other end of the scale where I'd prefer to wax less frequently. So, and especially for mountain bike, this is awesome because mountain bikes, high torque, a lot more cross chaining. The wax doesn't stick around for as long. Like in my experience, I sort of get like 2 to 3 rides out of a wax chain on a mountain bike, which might be only like 100k. And so if I can double that, that's awesome. So I think this is a cool product.
Yeah, I think it kind of opens the realistic applications of chain waxing to a broader audience, let's say, or more users of bikes than a different context than maybe what it was once intended for, which was basically road going applications. So it's a cool idea, and I look forward to your feedback and diligent testing, which I'm sure is forthcoming. Yeah,
for sure. Otherwise, there is a new bike, or a couple of new bikes. Ronan actually covered these on our website, Escape Collective. But they're from Trek. Trek released a couple of new carbon gravel bikes. So they updated the checkpoint. They made it a bit more adventure-like. Meanwhile, they released a new gravel race bike, the CheckMate, which is something we'd seen at Unbound. But the talking point of these bikes, and the thing everyone's getting stuck on, is the tire clearance of the CheckMate. So officially
45.
Yeah.
As measured, they say. So it could be anything. If you're running these new Explorer wheels, these new Zip wheels, maybe that's only a 42 that measures 45. So you got to get your caliper out now.
Yeah. So Trek's, they stick to ISO standards with the available room around said tire. So there's going to be at least 4 millimeters surrounding either side of that tire. So depending on how close you want to play it, you can fit more in there. But it is interesting. Yeah, I think for me, if you want to know the details of the bike, head to the website. Everyone else has covered this bike. But the hold up and everyone getting stuck on saying this is an out-of-date bike, I think is interesting to discuss because the trend to use tires in gravel racing wider than a 40 or even a 45 feels to me has happened all within the last 6 months, which is when these bikes would have already been in production. So, Brad, do you think not being able to fit such a wide tire makes a bike outdated, or is it?
What I think, so I actually really like the look of this bike. I'm not a big Trek guy, full disclosure necessarily for whatever reason or reasons, but nevertheless, this is sort of the style of gravel bike that I actually sort of prefer. Something that's a little bit fast and nimble, maybe not something you strap a billion, attachments to go on a multi-day camping adventure. And what it seems to me like Trek is doing here is kind of making the checkpoint the bike you want to do that on, and then sort of creating like a bigger distinguishing kind of characteristic from one bike to the other. So it seems, I don't think it's outdated. I think it's perfectly suited for most gravel racing if you're not, hitting single track along the way and it's not like a burly course. So it's a little bit narrow for the current trend, but I think it also is perfectly suited for some applications. And so I think that having two is Trek's answer to that problem. And I'm sure that I haven't actually checked if the current checkpoint and the new checkpoint if there was a tire clearance change. Maybe you can answer that question, Dave. If they've increased.
Off the top of my head.
Yeah, I didn't actually see that specifically answered, but nevertheless, we know it has more clearance than the CheckMate. And so my thinking is kind of like the Diverge and the Crux that Specialized offers. It's kind of the same, having two bikes, one of which is more like gravel racing and one is sort of gravel lifestyle, let's say. We've had a lot of trouble in conversations around the nomenclature here in the gravel world. This might be an all-road bike, Dave. After all, this CheckMate may not be a gravel bike at all. Did we even just think about that possibility?
It could just be an all-road bike.
It might just be all-road.
And if you treat it as an all-road bike, it's got plenty of tire clearance.
Lots of clearance.
It's state-of-the-art. But yeah, so I think to rewind a little bit, like the trends we're seeing, I think Dylan Johnson in the gravel world might have been the first to really start pushing this in the elite gravel racing world, to start using mountain bike width tires, like 2.1, 2.2 inch wide 29er tires. But we're now seeing like Keegan Swenson. He just won Steamboat gravel on his gravel bike, but with like fully maxed out tire clearance, and they're basically running mountain bike tires where they'd trimmed the tread off the rear tire just so it wouldn't rub the frame. So like the tire's that close to the frame. And they're really running up against the limits of what a gravel bike can fix. I think Payson McAlvin's on a prototype Allied, which has enough tire clearance to fit something big as well. So they're trying to run mountain bike tires in their gravel bikes, and it doesn't seem like it's just for rough races, because Steamboat's pretty well manicured as far as a gravel race goes. So it does just seem like they're just trying to float over whatever surface they're racing on. But yeah, it comes back to the fact that this is such a new trend that I think it has caught just about everyone by surprise as a racing trend. I don't think, if you imagine that the bike design timeline probably starts 2 to 3 years before the time you actually see the bike, nobody at the elite end of gravel racing was running big mountain bike rubber and asking for it. 2 years ago. Even probably 18 months ago, it probably wasn't really a thing. So I kind of just feel sorry for brands in this case. I don't think they've released an out-of-date bike, but they've more so just been caught by surprise at how rapidly this trend has become a thing amongst the pro ranks. Yes, gravel bikes will need to change. Yes, gravel bikes will change, but I think we're honestly seeing a case that most brands are going to be 2 years out from what customers want, and they're, unfortunately for the likes of Trek, they're probably going to be stuck with a lot of stock that they can't really move to their ideal customer base, because that customer base is now demanding something that wasn't a thing 6 months ago. Yeah, it's interesting to me. Like, I think that the sales side is interesting of it. I think the technology side of it is really interesting, because you can't just squeeze a giant tire into a gravel bike. There's a chain line in place, there's a crank width issue, there's a chainstay length issue, there's a toe overlap issue that I feel like gravel bikes have only just solved based around like a 45 millimeter tire, and now we're running even bigger tire. You have to make the front center longer. So we're talking about geometry changes that are going to have to happen. Like, it's kind of just resetting gravel bike design all over again. It's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, if you've ever tried to max tire widths out, not just on a gravel bike, but any type of bike, you will oftentimes find that, and especially on a gravel bike with relatively, compared to a mountain bike, short chain stays, the chain angle, you may find yourself scrubbing the side knobs of the tire when you're in like the large cog in the back, because the drivetrain too, not just the frame, may have been also designed several years ago before the current trends were influencing spacing and that kind of thing. So we'll see who changes first, whether there's we kind of hit like a little bit of pushback on this tire width. It seems ever expanding at the moment, kind of across all genres, but especially in the gravel world, I would say most significantly.
Yeah.
But everybody has to play catch up, but you're also gonna, whether it's slacker head angle that gets you a little bit of a longer kind of wheelbase to accommodate toe overlap, like you say, there's a lot of little challenges, but it makes sense. Tires are sort of the original suspension, and to have the ability to, I spent a little time in Steamboat, and although it's pretty groomed, the roads are pretty washboardy, and I was out there riding, and
that's true.
20 years ago, I was in college at the time. I was riding tubulars on some of these roads, probably not the gnarliest ones, but I mean, it was definitely a hair-raising experience. So I can imagine, even on a larger volume, kind of old school, let's say as of 6 months ago, it was current gravel width of maybe 45 mils. Even that would have been a handful. So I can see where in certain situations having such a large tire would be advantageous. But like, I mean, the industry has to either scrap 2024 altogether and just start over, but like you say, there's always a little bit of a kind of a period of time where the industry has to not only develop the products, but test them and make sure they're up to speed before they can release it. So I don't think it's next year that we'll see a new one from Trek, no matter what they want to do.
I honestly can't think of a single other time where a technology shift from the racer end has happened so quickly and actually caught the bikes. Like, I don't think this has ever happened before, where the bike manufacturers have been caught off guard by their own athletes, and that has caused a consumer shift that then can't sell the bikes that the athletes are riding. Like, this might be a first for the bike industry that I can think of. Like,
yeah,
can you name one other? Like,
I mean, only in the like, and this is by no means a direct comparison, but only in the when mountain biking was sort of first conceived and there weren't products that existed. But it's kind of the same thing happening again, where they're adapting products from other genres of bike, just like what happened with mountain bikes in the first place. They took what was available and adapted it to make a bike that worked in the way they want it to, and it's kind of what's happening in gravel, even though the products they're using are, you know, much more sophisticated. But it's still kind of, they're making Frankenbikes out of, you know, some mountain bike stuff, some road and some gravel bike stuff. And so,
which is,
it's cool.
Yeah.
It's cool. And as a mechanic,
cool.
It's very interesting to think about. And, but the industry has to catch up, and they're going to be left behind.
And it's full circle for gravel, because gravel literally started with Frankenbike design. It was Monster Cross is kind of its birthplace, which is like people wanting more capable cross bikes, so converting mountain bikes to drop bar, and that created the gravel category, and it's come full circle in that regard. Like, we're now seeing pros, you know, as we discussed last week, they're at the elite end of this racing category. They're turning their mountain bike hardtails into drop bar bikes to get more tire capacity and the benefits there. And yeah, it's kind of funny that it didn't take that long to come full circle in that way. But you know, it's probably only 15 years, if that. So
where will we be in 6 months?
With a lot of discounted bikes.
Yeah, true. On the closeout rack.
A lot of discounted bikes that are no longer being labeled as gravel, but are now all road.
Yes.
Anyway, yeah, just interesting. Nothing really to add on that, but I think it's definitely a trend to watch, and a trend we'll keep coming back to. And I think, it's probably worth a deep dive at one point. And it's also something that I've asked Rob English, the famed frame builder. He's actually going to be walking the halls of Made this weekend, the bike show in the US, on our behalf, and when he's not standing at his own booth. And I've asked him to keep an eye out for this trend as well and report back. I know one Darren Baum of Baum Cycles is on display there, and he's taken a drop bar mountain bike with him to display. So I think it'll be interesting to see how many other of these high-end boutique builders are sort of creating these machines.
This might be a moment for the big build, for the boutique builder, you know, because they sort of are nimble enough and small enough and adaptable enough that they can actually respond to this trend more quickly than a big brand like Trek does. So
and often these trends start there, right? Like
exactly.
I know a few of these builders have been playing with 50 plus tires for quite some time. Like Prova's been a few years now on such wide tires, and I think it's certainly the handmade scene is always the first place you see new versions of these, when people, you know, customers or builders themselves see the trend and want to build something fresh and new rather than repurpose like a 15, 20-year-old bike and achieve a very similar thing. So, all right. Well, Brad, I was thinking we'll do a pick one about seat posts. This came from a member request. They wanted to know our favorite round seat posts. They were talking 27.2, 31.6, but I think it really applies to other diameters as well, namely 30.9. If you need a 26.8, sorry, we can't help you there. But do you have a favorite round seat post?
Aesthetically, I like a straight 27.2. But to answer this question, if I could only pick one, I would go with the 31.6. And that's pretty much because...
No, I'm not talking about diameter. I'm not asking you to pick a diameter. I'm asking you to pick an actual physical seat post.
Oh.
Yeah.
My God, what a question. Okay, well, so I have
although I'll come
answers.
Back to your reason why 31.6 is a diameter, because that's intriguing. But go on. Okay.
Well, I think my answer will answer that in a way. And it's basically, there's no real compelling 27.2. I mean, there are some, but I don't trust a 27.2 dropper post, because the slidey bit, the stanchion of the post, if you will, is so small in diameter that I feel like structurally not an ideal size. And then by having a larger diameter seat post, I think it's a little structurally more of a resilient, especially, it's not a vertical motion. It's pretty loaded on the back side. And so you need kind of a little bit more structure and support, I think, internally to make a dropper post last a long time and be durable. So, and also for long travel applications. That's why I would choose that.
Gotcha.
If I could only pick one.
But let's talk gravel / road. Imagine a road bike has a round seat tube, or a gravel bike has a round seat tube, not a dropper post. Yeah. Rigid seat post. Do you have a seat post you'd be picking for yourself?
Yeah. Are you familiar with the German company MCFK? It's a carbon, kind of a Gucci carbon manufacturer. You see a lot of that on Fairwheel.
All right. Straight to the top.
Dave.
All right.
This is a seat post I actually own. I have it on my Cervelo, the R5 California, which was once discussed on this podcast as my sort of the prize of my collection. That although it's more than a decade old now, but it's still beautiful. Still incredibly light. It's like 5.8 kilos as a daily, and just a wonderful bike. And at the time I was in a shop, and one of the main reasons you'd work in a shop as a young person is for the discount. And this was like the only thing I bought, even still probably since then, and very few things that I've actually paid full retail for. And I bought it because the claimed weight, so it's 100 grams for the seat post, which is insane. It has a clampable range of about 4 centimeters. So you have to kind of get it to a specific length based on your saddle height. And, it's quite optimized. And, I have to take it out to put the bike in a work stand because I can't clamp it with a work stand. So, that's how
your
fancy
pick
I am,
one
Dave.
sucks.
Yeah, me and my tubulars and my stupid seat post. But you asked me to. But I bought it because the weight would take the bike under 13 pounds, which as an American, that's, that was the benchmark I was shooting for, was under 13 for a 58 centimeter bike that I could daily, basically. So that's why I did it. And I have no regrets. And it has never failed and it has no problems. It's amazing. 100 gram seat post. I weigh, 170 pounds. Right. I don't know what that is. And, but yeah, that's my answer.
Wait,
and
Weenie.
then RockShox Reverb AXS is my mountain bike, not weight weenie at all. But that thing has just been a dream to own. I've never had a problem with that either.
Yeah. The mountain bike versions are great. Not a big fan of the Explore post because it seems
27.2.
The rattle in the 27.
Too small.
The 27.2 doesn't have enough bushing overlap, is what I'm finding.
No, and it wears out lateral. Like the side to side wiggle gets very noticeable very fast.
This is what I'm finding.
Yes.
All right. So Brad, last week I pushed you on your favorite bra tape, which apparently turns out to be discontinued anyway. Your thin
I know.
micro touch. Yeah. Anyway,
fortunately I have a bin full in my basement. Yeah, I prepared for this like it's Armageddon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I pushed you to pick one that you might recommend to a customer, to someone that you just wanted to put on a reliable post. What would you actually advise other people to put on their bike?
You should know by now that I wouldn't answer with something that's like reliability as the primary. But Thompson.
Really?
A Thompson Elite, the original Thompson. Yeah, it's basically unchanged since like 1993 or something. The masterpiece is beautiful and lovely and nice, but it's not that much lighter. It's a little bit lighter. And in mountain bike lengths, I've found that it actually develops a little bit of a kink at the collar from the amount of extension that it has and the amount of sort of leverage on it.
Sure.
I've had a few of those as mountain bike seat posts back in the day, and before the dropper posts, came into its own. So I would maybe skip that if I had to recommend just one, and reliability was a factor. I would say the original plain old straight Thompson Elite seat post that has not changed in 30 years. It's hasn't changed for a reason. It's pretty hard to beat, and a lot of downhill pros are using them.
It's a very reliable pick. I would
yes
push back a little on your pick one in that incredibly reliable pick. Actually, I would agree, it's quite aesthetically beautiful as a product, and it's also my go-to anytime you need a weird diameter. But it's not compliant.
No,
it's very rigid, of a rigid seat post. So
my first choice was very compliant.
Yeah.
But you didn't like it.
No. You lost me at the can't clamp it in a work stand.
Yeah.
So,
YOLO.
Fair enough. All right.
That's it.
For me, I'm gonna recommend a carbon in this scenario because a seat post is one of the few places on a bike where you can actually add not a lot, but a small amount of appreciable comfort to the bike, assuming you have a reasonable amount exposed from the frame. If you're on like a square geometry old school frame that is slightly too big for you and you've only got a few inches of post sticking out, then it doesn't matter what post you get. It's not going to have enough length to flex. But yeah, if you're on a more modern frame with a drop chop tube and that allows a good amount of exposed seat post, then I would say, yeah, an upgrade to a nice, compliant, flexible carbon post can be money well spent. And for me, there's a few that are compliant, like Specializer's Roval Terra seat post, I'd like to say it is one that I found to be comfy. Easton EC90 is another that I've got on quite well with, and their clamp design's quite cool because it separates the rail fore-aft from like the angle, kind of like that Reverb seat post we were talking about. Yeah,
I agree with you here completely. That especially if you're looking to add a little bit of compliance or some vibration management.
Why wouldn't you?
And why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
So, I mean, a lot of brands have actually like capitalized on that tech. I mean, you remember Cannondale with the Save seat post? Yep. That was like, a lot of brands have actually tried to engineer some flex in there.
A lot of brands claim to.
Yeah, I think sometimes they find it's flexy after the fact, and then they claim that that's why they did it, which I'm not 100% sure is true. But some of them are definitely appear to be engineered that way on purpose. The Cannondale one, for example, had a flat segment in the middle, kind of like the scalpel chainstays did to sort of facilitate flex and put it in a certain spot and kind of isolate where the flex occurred. But yeah, especially if you ride for example, back in the day, that was a huge thing for both road and mountain bikes, both because the mountain bike typically had a lot more seat posts exposed, so the effect was, magnified. And on a road bike, oftentimes they were aluminum or maybe partially carbon and then partially another material, but maybe not a full carbon bike like most are today. And so you could really feel that difference. You put a carbon post on an aluminum bike, for example, man, there's no question about the improvement. So that's a very real thing. Mm-hmm. And from your premise, I completely agree with you.
Yeah. Another one I'd add is if you really want a high level of comfort, the most comfortable rigid seat post out there, not so rigid, is probably the Canyon/Ergon 2-piece post, the leaf spring carbon post. It does work as you would expect of a leaf spring design. However, it is probably a higher maintenance than a regular seat post in that they can creak. I also have experienced them more likely to slip. So, there are downsides to them, but once you overcome the slipping, there's actually a little secret shim you can that they now ship with the seat posts that goes in between and tries to stop the post from kind of collapsing in on itself at the clamp point. That seems to get it, and once you've got that in place, it becomes quite a lovely product to add a little bit of compliance to your existing bike, assuming you can run a round seat post in there. So there are options, but I would say there are also posts out there that claim to be hugely compliant and flexible, and they're not. In my experience, I think Ritchie seat posts they have a version that claims to be super comfy, and I haven't found that one to be particularly comfort inducing. So results may vary.
Yeah, and I would just add too that in this case, I would have to choose 27.2 as my diameter to rule them all, for the same reason you're choosing this carbon post option as your post to rule them all, because in both cases, the maximum flex will be achieved with a smaller diameter. And a lot of road frames kind of claimed they didn't want to use large diameter seat tubes to accommodate a large diameter seat post because it also affected the stiffness of the frame for the same reasons. Yeah. So maybe we could even recommend that people with large diameter seat posts get a shim and run a 27.2 carbon post just so they can all have the smoothest ride, Dave, just to support your choice.
Yeah, I'm for that. Yeah, if you've got a rigid bike that you want to run a rigid post on and you want more comfort, then shim it to a 27.2.
Remember the USE shock post?
Oh, yeah.
And like the Cane Creek Thudbuster?
Yeah, they're all still
a thing. Why didn't you mention either of those? I know.
They've had a resurgence. Redshift does one as well. There's a bunch of them now. Right. But yeah, I mean, that gets into a whole different category. Maybe a future pick one. But I would say, to summarize, 27.2 is our preferred diameter when you want to run a rigid post. 31.6 or even 34.9 is probably our preferred diameter, assuming you're running a dropper post. But yeah, unfortunately, some of these bikes are kind of picking like a 31.6 in case you want to run a dropper, but most people are running rigid posts, and then in turn, are they getting a more rigid ride than they perhaps had bargained for. So yeah. Okay, so my pick one. Right. I didn't pick one, and that is because there is no single seat post that I think solves the problem for every single person. You've also got the problem of setback versus straight and what you actually need. I personally typically run straight posts on all of my bikes because I like a more forward position than what every bike I own perhaps offers in its geometry. But yeah, so there's also the argument of I'm kind of sad in terms of the aesthetics, like many other people. And where possible, I do like to match my brands in the cockpit. So I like to have the seat post matching the stem and the handlebar where possible. So not always possible, but if I can do it, I will. So that is why I can't necessarily pick one in this category, but rather can recommend a handful. But yeah, I would say to narrow it down, Brad, is there a clamp design that you just hate?
A clamp design for seat posts?
Yeah.
For the head, for like the saddle rail clamp?
Yeah.
Yes, there is. And the name of it, the actual like brand name of it, or the model of it escapes me, but I'll tell you which one it is and you'll probably know.
It's 3T, isn't it?
The 3T.
Oh,
yes, it is. Oh, man, that one sucks. Woo, that's a bad one.
Is it the rotating ring within the
yeah.
The
It's
spline system?
Just, no matter what you write down and the notes you leave for yourself about what to do and where you make a marker, you just can't get it right.
No. And they added to the insult by using a T27 bolt at one point. I don't know if they still do. I
don't either. I haven't even attempted to look at one in about 10, 12 years. Yeah. But that came along sort of after do you remember like the Doric and the Ionic? I think it was the Ionic post that went. Was that the one that went to this design that I'm thinking of? It happened around 2012. I can't remember, 11 maybe. But it was like a Thompson style, like a 2-bolt, very, very normal, easy, lightweight design. And then I don't really know what possessed them to change it to the one that I now hate as my number one most hated seat post in the world. Yeah. I think it was designed to not really be able to slip or come out of its angle position, but it's also like very hard to get it into the correct angle that you want as well, because there's not like infinite angle adjust like should exist on every seat post in my opinion. So if you have one of those, I'm sorry.
So pick a post that does have infinite angle adjustment, but at the same time, I guess what I don't like are posts that have just a single side bolt that holds everything together, but then also lock it into place. So once you tighten the bolt, you then can't change the saddle angle without or undoing the bolt all the way and twisting the post and undoing, having it all fall apart and having to reset everything once again. I don't like those single bolt designs, and that's kind of where like the Eastern post recommendation came from, is that they have a single bolt, but then the angle adjust is separate to that, and it's really nice. And that's kind of my preference these days. Either a post like that or a more traditional, the Thompson style 2-bolt is still pretty hard to beat. Yeah, so consider how easy it is to adjust your saddle, and whether your saddle can slip from its position are two things I'd probably advise when shopping for a seat post. Well, there you go. A pick none. Let's move on. I think we should jump to Ask a Wrench. What do you reckon?
Let's do it.
Sweet. All right. So to remind everyone, Ask a Wrench, this is the 3rd episode now that we've had it back, and it's going to be a standing feature in each episode, and you can submit questions if you are a member of Escape Collective. And if you are a member of Escape Collective, thank you for your support. But yeah, you can now submit questions via voice message. And to do that, head to escapecollective.com/hello. You can introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, then ask your question. Try to keep it brief, around a minute if possible. But yeah, if you need to go a bit over, we'll let our editors work. So with that, this week we had a submission from John Groves out of Australia. Hey, John. John and I go way back. A long time hanger out on Weight Weenies forums. So yes, hello, Mr. Grover. Anyway, we'll play his question and we'll be right back.
Hi, Dave and Brad. John Groves here from Melbourne, Australia. In the mountain bike world, a few people have put HG Plus cassette chainring on their bike and mixed it with AXS shifting prior to transmitting, derailleur and shifter. I wonder if you know how well that would work on a gravel bike. I'm picturing a 12-speed AXS derailleur and shifter with the Explore series mixed with a Shimano HG Plus 10 to 45 cassette chainring chain to suit of all of the Hyperglide Plus design. Thanks.
All right, Brad. I think there's a short answer, and then we'll get to the long answer. What's the short answer on this?
Short answer is yes. It's a good idea conceptually. As long as I think the spacing will work. The range of the cassette is basically close enough that you can adjust the derailleur correctly.
Yeah.
In terms of like B gap,
plenty of B gap screw on that kind of derailleur.
Yeah, lots. And so yes is the answer to that. And I would say just if anyone is attempting to do something like this or go the other way with mix and match SRAM stuff on a mountain bike, I don't know. As long as I think you keep basically the cassette and chain brands the same, in other words, two compatible chain and cassette. As long as you have that accounted for, then the rest is achievable. So that's my shortest answer.
Yep. To clarify, we're not talking about anything with the full mount UDH transmission style derailleur. This is all the previous generation stuff where like traditional mounting derailleurs. So if it's like an Eagle that mounts to a traditional derailleur hanger or this Explore derailleur, then that's kind of what we're talking about. So, it's actually something I've done myself. I had it on my hardtail. I had SRAM Eagle derailleur and AXS shifter, and then matched that with a microspline Shimano 10 to 51 tooth cassette, XTR chain, and I actually had a race face crank on the front. But and it worked flawlessly, and the goal was to get the better shifting benefits of Shimano's HG Plus shifting ramps and the smoothness of the Shimano chain, and match it with wireless shifting, and it really does work. I would say that there is kind of the one tricky part is actually the pulley wheel compatibility. Some people claim it's no issue. I found that the Shimano chain, which has like these sort of like oversized lips on built-in chamfers into the outer plates of the chain, the inner side of the outer plates, I found that they hug quite closely and they will create more noise on like a stock SRAM pulley wheel. I've heard some people file their pulley wheels down to overcome this. Others, dare I say, ignorant to it and say it's no issue. I took it a step further and actually replaced those pulley wheels. I ended up running some Sea Bear pulley wheels. But there's Ceramic Speed, I know, also have pulley wheels that work in this scenario, no issue. I'm sure there's others as well. But that's probably the one sticking point here is pulley wheel compatibility that you may not consider. But it can be done and it seems to work quite well. And if you've got a bunch of Shimano bikes but you want wireless shifting on this one bike, then that could be a good way to keep the same chain on all bikes. So
and I think people, if they haven't experienced it before, would be kind of surprised and impressed by how smoothly and quietly Shimano chains and cassettes do shift. If you've been riding SRAM for a while, sometimes it's a little eye-opening to experience that. But I would also say too, just to piggyback, it's not exactly the question anymore, but it's related. I've also seen the opposite done on the mountain bike side, where a Shimano equipped bike was running a SRAM Eagle 1052 cassette for the additional range. It was a 12-speed system, so it's 12-speed mechanical Shimano drivetrain featuring that cassette, and we ran corresponding SRAM chain, and that also worked pretty dang well.
Yeah, cool. So I'd say with this, like, obviously if you're on mechanical shifting, then just go like GRX mechanical. Like there's no real reason to get too complicated on this. But if you really want to, you're impatient and you don't want to wait for Shimano to release their Di2 gravel group set in 2035, then this might be a nice option. And I guess there are some technical details to be aware of, like their Shimano chains are quite fussy with chainring compatibility, so you'll probably need to figure out a suitable chainring that'll work well with this. And also, the pulley wheels, and then there's also like free hub compatibility to consider, because these cassettes are a micro spline, which is a mountain bike style cassette. So yeah, if you're going from a SRAM bike that has a different freeride body, then there are other expenses you might need to consider here. But yes, Mr. Groves, I'm sure you're well across all that, and go forth, enjoy. Next question on the list comes from mechanic Sam Jung, who asks, what torque are we setting pedals to, or installing pedals at? He says, do we just do them enough instead? Because it seems like every time he goes to take them off, he wonders what mechanic had previously set them to, and whether they wanted to permanently install them. So it's a good question. Brad, I think I know the answers to this, and it's probably the same as mine, but do you use a torque wrench for installing pedals?
No.
Yeah, neither.
Not really. I will say that in a few occasions where I believe it was an old Time road pedal that had like hollow titanium axle, then I did.
Yep.
Just because when you're working on some, delicate stuff that's already kind of optimized to the, limit of its capabilities, then yes, I would say do it.
And I'll also do it for power meter pedals where the power meter pedal requires torque in order to be accurate. So like earlier generation vectors, for example.
Yes, that's a good point.
Yeah.
And but yeah, otherwise no. And I think I have the same experience. Whether it's a pedal that I've personally installed or a pedal that just appears in the shop in front of me from who knows where, they are often, it seems like a lot more force is required to remove them than to put them on.
Absolutely.
The tools used, even an 8mm Allen wrench is typically pretty long, and a pedal wrench even longer. So you have quite a bit of leverage, even though it doesn't feel like you're pushing very hard. You often are. And if you use the rear wheel to sort of give you like kind of counter leverage the operator, you know what I'm talking about, Dave? To kind of push back on the rear wheel as you tighten, then you have, the amount of leverage actually created by the wheel is pretty extreme. So it's easy to get to high torque without it feeling like you're pushing very hard. Of course, torque is a base of the torque rating that everybody uses as referencing a tool of a certain length to achieve the torque value that's prescribed. And in most of these cases I'm discussing now, all those tools are longer than what you might use when calibrating torque to begin with. But most manufacturers are between 30 and 40 Newton meters. Just to answer the question of what it kind of should be, there is a spec listed. It's quite high. I don't think that even when I'm doing it blind and giving it a firm amount of tightness, I'm sure I'm not exceeding like 25 Newton meters. So 30 to 40 is a lot. It's like BB cup tight, or some lock rings, or like a cassette lock ring is like 40 Newton meters from most brands. So it's a very firm amount of torque, and it usually BB tools, cassette tools, they're all pretty long tools that have a lot of leverage to help you achieve that torque. So it's a high value. I think sometimes too people see a torque spec in general and sort of think it means that it should be low. Have you ever experienced this? I see stuff come in where it's just like super under torqued and it doesn't really make sense. Cassettes are a particular thing that comes to mind here, and they're often written right on the lock ring, like 40 Newton meters. I don't think everybody has. Maybe they don't. I don't know.
No, my experience is that when something calls for a low torque, people over torque, and when something calls for a high torque, people under torque.
Yeah. It's weird because like I see people bring bikes in that have a creak, and it's often from a loose cassette lock ring where the load to the cassette allows the cassette to creak on the free hub body. This is more common, I would say, on like HG, like Shimano, older Shimano style bodies. The newer ones are like more splined, and I feel like there's less creak opportunity there. But nevertheless, don't shy away. If you don't have a torque wrench for any of these BB cups, I would say best case you'd have a torque wrench for that. But a cassette lock ring probably doesn't need to go to 40, but it needs to be a lot. And same with pedals.
Yeah, it needs to be a lot, but like I would say there is probably, as you say, there are a lot of mechanics that are over tightening pedals more than they need to. Like it's not over tightening in that it's going to risk stripping a thread or doing damage to anything, but it is just probably making it harder to remove than it needs to be without any real benefit. So yeah, don't use the full length of your professional pedal wrench to tighten the pedals. I think if you can imagine how tight you do a cassette lock ring, I personally go a little bit less on pedals, and you can feel it. You can feel where it starts to stop turning, and that's sort of as far as I go, and it is about 30 Newton meters. So yeah, also don't forget the anti-seize or grease is the other element that's probably making these harder to remove than needed. So a good one for everyone out there. And I'd say, yeah, if you're a home mechanic and don't know how tight this is, then invest in a torque wrench and get a feel for what 30 newton meters feels like. Because yeah, there's, as Brad says, it's very common for these more higher torque applications on bicycles, relatively high torque. I mean, it's bicycles are low torque items, but yeah, it's very common for home mechanics to under torque bolts that require 40 to 50 newton meters. So high chance that's why your bike creaks.
Yeah, I was going to say too, all of these happen to be things that creak a lot too and are under a lot of load. So it's, cassette BB cups and the pedal spindle into the crank armor, like, and maybe if you had a quick release or even a possibly loose quick axle in the back, if you have a through axle, that would be like the main thing. So they're all like under load and need to be adequately tight, let's say.
For sure. And I'd say, just one further thing is if you're a home mechanic and you're purposefully not doing your pedals up very tight so you can take them off very easily, just get yourself a longer hex key. So you then have confidence that you can take the pedals off when you need to. That's probably, the main bit of advice there is like, don't ride around with your pedals potentially loose and creaking and potentially able to fall out or rattle loose. Just tighten them correctly and get yourself a suitable tool for undoing them if the time comes. All right, lucky last for this week. Brad from Kansas, USA asks, I'm looking for advice on Shimano pedal bearings. I always fully disassemble, clean, and grease, but every time I think I should just aerosol out the old grease and squeeze new in. Am I wasting time, or will I be sad when I didn't clean every last ball bearing? Brad, you're meticulous. I appreciate this, but as you'll soon hear, you might be overdoing it.
Yeah, I commend you. First of all, you're doing like way more than 95 or more % of people who own Shimano pedals.
Somehow you're doing more than 101% of Shimano pedal owners.
Yeah. Most people just ride them until they develop so much play that people can't stand them anymore and move on. But so what I do when I clean like a cartridge bearing like that out is once I've done I assume the aerosol part, that's like a aerosol degreaser to hose out whatever is still inside the bearing. I will actually run a little bit of isopropyl alcohol in there just to like further clean it out one time, and kind of it dries quickly and kind of leaves basically a super dry surface that you can then add your lube of choice for whatever your application or whatever your heart desires. But I would say short answer, you're doing just fine. I'd say having clean, fresh grease in there, it's doing as much lubricating as it is being a moisture barrier. So as long as you've kind of eliminated the majority of old, if it's dirty grease, if there's gritty stuff in it, get that out of there, obviously, which should be achievable doing what you're doing already, and then adding fresh grease. And if you do it periodically, there should be zero negative from having not cleaned every molecule of what might be old grease from your ball bearings.
So we're talking about Shimano's cup and cone pedal systems here. So you kind of undo the nut, it pulls the whole pedal assembly out with the bearings intact to the spindle, and it just leaves the body separate. Brad, are you actually pulling apart the cup and cone assembly so all the ball bearings are pieced out, or are you just saying you keep it intact and spray it and then re-grease? And what's your approach here?
I don't go to the full extent of pulling everything out and degreasing each individual ball.
Yeah, cool.
No, I would not necessarily go that far.
Okay, so from my point, I go way less intricate than all of this, which is take the pedal spindle assembly out, clean the outside of it, no chemicals. I just wipe it with like shop towel.
It's usually not dirty in there.
Yeah,
really.
because it's pretty well sealed, and the gunk normally sits towards the outer end, the main seal. So what I'll do is I'll just inject a bunch of fresh grease into the pedal body, and then as you thread it together carefully, it purges the old grease out the dirty end.
Yes.
And that way you basically, you're flushing fresh grease through. The only issue here is that on, say, like XTR pedals, you can actually push that main seal out by doing this. But most of the other pedals are more tolerant to this and don't end up with seals coming out. So yeah, I think that's my approach, and it takes, it's like a minute and a half, a 2-minute process.
5-minute job.
Yeah,
exactly.
And for me, that's
is
basically
sufficient. What I also do.
Yeah.
And I just try to be careful because I like to use a little bit of Loctite on the assembly, like on the threads when I put it back together. So I try not to get grease everywhere if I can avoid it. That was the only maybe little caveat I would say in the way that I would do it on, my own pedals if I wanted to feel like I was going, all the way.
Gotcha.
But it's funny. What you just said actually reminded me of what I kind of thought of as the reason why I don't think it's that necessary to get surgical in there is I was remembering the WTB grease guard products from the 90s and, Campy Hubs and
DMR V8 pedals.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, where it's basically an injectable system where with a grease gun, you could just squirt fresh grease in, and the seals were such that it would basically allow the old dirty grease to kind of purge out under pressure from the new grease being purged in. And that's kind of what you're describing, minus the grease gun part, Dave. Yep. And I had great experience with those products. They lasted for, years and years and years with zero flaws. So I think that's proof that you don't need much grease to lubricate, but you need a lot to be a moisture barrier and keep stuff out. And I think that's where servicing things like this is very valuable to do once in a while, but it's really not, especially because they don't spin that fast. Like there's not a ton of like specific like bearing tuning or care that needs to be done like you might in other parts of your bike, I would say.
Yeah. But yeah, this is definitely one of those areas. So Brad, like I'd say, you don't need to spend the hour taking each ball bearing out and ultrasonic cleaning them. I would not go that far. I think that there's definitely ways to be efficient, and it sounds like you're pretty on top of this. So the more you do this, the less time you need to spend doing it, because the dirt won't find its way into the ball bearings. Yeah, fundamentally, this is one of the more ignored areas of the bike. That a lot of people run Shimano SPD or SPD SL pedals, and often it's one of the most neglected parts that I see on bikes I occasionally work on. That they have pedal bearings play setting in and are run very dry or with dirty grease, and it's something I like to do pretty much. Any service I would do is with the pedals off the bike, I'll quickly basically do what I described before, which is take the spindles out, give them a quick wipe, fresh grease in, tighten up the cones if required, but that's fairly rare, and then away you go, and you've got all of a sudden brand new feeling pedals. So something to be done, and something people can do at home. You don't even have to take the pedals off the bike in most instances. Yeah,
it's almost easier if you don't, in a way. And there's YouTube videos out there, but like Dave said, this literally takes once you've done it once or twice, about 2 minutes a pedal to do this and get them back together. It's quite fast, and it makes a big difference, and it prolongs the lifespan of the pedals too. Yep. So do that, and check out a YouTube video if you've never done it before. They're out there, and oftentimes the videos are longer than it actually takes to do the work. So but give it a try. It's not too hard. And
to call back to an older episode where I asked you to pick one grease, are you picking your magical green Shimano grease once again?
I am picking that. Yeah, I think that's the stock grease too that is inside there to begin with. So it's good for both reasons, but it is still my grease of choice. So
Shimano Special Grease or Motorex 2000?
Bike Grease 2000.
Bike Grease 2000. There are some suggestions that they're not the same, but they certainly seem close enough. So
they taste the same.
They taste the same. Does remind me of a day in the bike shop where the rep for White Lightning came in promoting their non-toxic, biodegradable clear grease, and I said,
we all tasted it, didn't we?
And the rep was horrified that I took a spoonful of it.
A spoonful? Wow, that's committed.
Yeah, probably why I can't eat gluten anymore. So anyway, thanks, White Lightning.
Keeps you regular though, so a spoonful a day.
Yeah, yeah. Wouldn't recommend White Lightning as a replacement for Metamucil. Yeah, speaking of things to take a bite of, we've got some quick tech bites. How was that for a segue?
That was good. Nice.
Thank you. All right, so not too many on the list, but we have seen a new wireless dropper post come out from Fox. So Fox transferred Neo wireless post, obviously a product to compete against the RockShox Reverb AXS that we actually gave a shout out to earlier. Brad, have you seen this thing pop up yet? Pun intended.
That's another good one there, Dave.
Thank you.
I haven't seen one in real life, to be honest.
Neither.
I've heard, that it was in development for a number of years. Obviously, it's to be expected given the success of the Reverb post and how much of a time saver and, how comparatively unstressful and tedious it is to install. So it's an exciting product. It's longer travel at the longest length that they offer than the Reverb currently is. So that's kind of one
up to 200
in
mil.
its box.
Yeah.
Up to 200. I think the max was 170 on the Reverb at the moment, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Weight on the Fox one, even at its longer length, is still 80 grams lighter than the longest length Reverb or thereabouts. So it's a little bit lighter. I have to say, I don't love the placement of the battery and the collar. It's a little bit, I don't know, it's not perfect in an aesthetic.
It looks to me like I would rub my knees on it. Like it's kind of this like widely, it's like this blocky thing in the center of the post. So like just below the telescoping part is this blocky section where the battery sits and the wireless system sits. And they've done that so basically to overcome an issue where the AXS post has, which is the battery sits at the back of the saddle. And the AXS post has some known issues that if used on really small frames with long travel suspension, when the suspension bottoms out, there have been known to be contact issues where the battery can basically bottom out on the saddle. So Fox have tried to address that by basically, moving the battery position. But I don't know, it just kind of looks like it's something that would annoy me.
It's sort of an afterthought looking design, I would say. And I could imagine, even though it may not, like, I don't know if my knees are really squeezing my seat post at any point, but it just seems kind of like a clunky, like it's more of like an eyesore, just sort of aesthetically breaks up. But I don't know. Yeah,
I just know I'm bothered by like rear lights that have like really wide clamps that hold them onto the seat post. Those like wide clamps I often can rub against, and I look at that thinking it's going to have the same issue, but I haven't used it, so maybe it's unfair to say that.
Yeah, I haven't used it either, and I can't say that would really upset me, but it does have some compelling features as well. I've never seen anybody actually rip their AXS battery off, but I didn't love that design. I thought that kind of looked funny too when it first came out, and maybe this will become so normal in a short period of time that we'll sort of
and it reduces
get used to it.
Swing weight as well.
Exactly. Lower center of gravity.
Yeah.
That's always a good idea. Yeah. So I'm sure it's an awesome product, just functionally. So I'm excited to actually see it and use it. And I think you'll, Dave, be excited because of previous complaint that it comes with 3 different
that is on my list of things I like. Yeah.
So I know you mentioned that you struggled with the AXS pod and finding a ergonomically satisfying position for your placement of controls, no matter what you tried. And so this one at least gets you in the game with 3 options. It's got an I-spec for Shimano clamps, a matchmaker style clamp for SRAM clamps, and then just a traditional bar clamp.
This is cool because most brands will charge you a $20-$30 for a new clamp, and the fact that they just give you 3 of them in the box is pretty cool, and probably something that most people will lose and then not be able to find when they actually need them, but is nice to have options and doesn't lock you into one shifter or brake or one brake system. So I like that they include those because the cost to manufacture is pretty low on those for them, so it's nice that it's in the box. The other thing of note here is that they actually designed their own wireless protocol. They claim that they could have done that. They researched Bluetooth and that their own wireless protocol is 100 times faster than Bluetooth, and also 20 times faster than their nearest competitor, which would be AXS. So it sounds promising, but proprietary protocol is interesting in that I wonder what else, that there's obviously a lot of development costs in that, and dare I say, that development cost wouldn't necessarily be worth it if it was just for a seat post. So I'm speculating here, but perhaps this would also be used for some Fox suspension. They've also designed a whole new battery system, removable, rechargeable battery system, which is very AXS inspired. But I think perhaps the seat post is a sign of maybe the next generation of like Fox live valve suspension, which would be the answer to Flight Attendant from RockShox.
Yeah, they've had pros testing their label. The products are labeled as RAD, R-A-D. It's like an acronym. I'm not sure actually what it stands for, but that's how they've been labeled. And it basically is a Gen 2 kind of live valve
racing
system with
application
a battery.
Development, I believe.
Thank you. Nice. Nice. They probably started with rad and had to figure out
Yes,
some words to
yes,
make
I
sense,
think so.
and worked backwards.
Very much so.
Yeah. But yeah, it's very derivative of an AXS system with a battery that's about the same size, but different shaped, of course. And it's the same battery that's been shown on the rear shocks that I've seen pictures of, and of the rad
there you go.
kind of pro only stuff. So to your point, Dave, it does appear that something's cooking. They don't have any projected release dates or any information about the suspension components with this technology in it, but at least it looks like there's a common battery, and that suggests that there's going to be some more fun stuff ahead.
Yeah, cool. All right, well, yeah, not cheap, and I guess Fox haven't had the most stellar reputation with their transfer seatposts or the early generation, and needing proprietary tools to fix them has made that kind of painful. So it'll be interesting to see the uptake in this, but one to watch. And as more and more e-bikes come to market with absolutely atrocious cable routing, I am actually all for more wireless dropper options, because it's a good solution to an industry created problem. Moving on.
Can I give one more little geek specific feature I thought was kind of interesting? They, in addition to a wireless protocol, they've obviously also developed a new app to use these products. Like every bike part needs its own app these days, including the seatpost. And so what it does do, among allowing other things, allowing you to pair it and so forth, is track how many cycles it's had up and down, and then it bases a maintenance protocol around that number rather than ride hours, which is traditionally how suspension service is done. Mm-hmm. So they claim 8,000 cycles is the interval, which is quite a lot, but it totally depends on how you ride and how you use your own seat post. And so that's why I think it's cool that it gives you like a more quantitative,
that is very cool,
or more accurately quantitative way to track that, rather than just assume about how many times, how many hours you've ridden your bike in the last few months. So that's pretty cool.
There's also some other cool things with that app. There's a bike park setting. So they had feedback from some of their pros that you could accidentally hit the button when you're like doing a jump, and that would send your seat post flying up and make you crash.
Could you imagine that?
And that because of that, they were having some of their pro riders like twist their remote out of the way so they couldn't accidentally hit it. So what they've got is they've got like a flight mode kind of equivalent where you can just like you can basically switch off the dropper post from communication. So if you were to accidentally hit the button, it doesn't react. I think that's a pretty cool feature actually for people that want to ride chairlifts. And what else is there? I think there's also the opportunity, I don't know if this is actually a feature at the moment, but there is also an opportunity to basically have the app set your maximum height, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it said that you cannot do it. I think you can't adjust the stroke on the electronic post.
Okay.
But you can on the new transfer mechanical post.
Okay. All right.
At the moment, maybe they'll do some firmware update.
Maybe there's a future of electronic posts that will let you adjust to the millimeter how high you want it. So anyway, food for thought on that. But some cool stuff there. But certainly not a cheap product. But also,
but it's about the same as a reverb, so it's not.
Which is also not a cheap product.
If you're no, but if you're in the market, it's not like
it's competitive to the other expensive options. Yeah. But both Brad and I have previously picked the Reverb as being a fantastic product. So if this is as good as that, then good to have options. All right, last on the list, Ratio Tech, one of our favorite British innovative companies that keeps finding ways to get more life out of old products. They have a new cage and a derailleur adapter that allows you to turn a current 12-speed SRAM AXS Road derailleur into an Explore 1x derailleur. So say you've got a road derailleur that currently has a cassette capacity of 10 to 33 or a 10 to 36 tooth cassette. You can now get this adapter kit, which comes with a new cage and a little derailleur bolt attachment. It allows you to then run up to a 10 to 45 tooth cassette, which is actually a little bit wider range than SRAM claims. So I think this is pretty cool. And it's about 100 quid, 100 British pounds, which is fair money given what normally cage assemblies cost. It can also be used as a replacement cage option if you happen to have an Explore derailleur that loses its cage. So yeah, I think this is pretty cool. I can't say how well it works, but I can't see any reason why it wouldn't work just fine. But Brad, what?
Yeah, I remember K-Edge did something like this back in the day as like a cage option to expand the usable gear range for of the cassette that you hoped to use.
Yeah.
I do remember that it didn't really. I mean, it worked. It did work. It worked adequately.
Yeah.
And if you kind of accepted that it wasn't quite as good as stock, then it was okay.
Yeah.
So I'd be curious. I'd be curious about this one because it's exceeding the capacity. The design is not just chain wrap, but it's also like the movement of the top pulley relative to the cassette. So it'd be interesting to me to see if they achieved that. Well enough.
I would say based on experience of other cage extenders, like this isn't a new idea of adjusting a current derailleur to fit more a wider range cassette. Like that, there's a lot of these in the market, and Garbrook is one example that also makes something that allows, if I'm not mistaken, allows you to run an AXS Road derailleur with a wider range cassette. But yeah, I think generally speaking, there is some downgrade to your shift performance, but yeah, often not enough for some people and enough for others. Yeah, it seems like mixed reports on some people are happy with it and others can't quite deal with it. So your results may vary, but yeah, typically I'd say Ratio Tech, they've taken some efforts to increase the cage rigidity versus a stock SRAM cage. So there's some elements that are quite promising here, and it's actually price-wise, it's a lot better than a lot of other options that predate it. So maybe worth an option if you worth a try. If you've got a AXS Road derailleur sitting around and you really want to go one by, perhaps worth a shot.
And if you want to use a Shimano cassette with a 45 tooth, hey, it's rated for that.
Yep.
So let's tell our friend,
for sure,
your buddy who had submitted his question this week, that he's got even one more option if he wants to get even weirder than he's already getting.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, for me, I'm more excited about this for the idea of having an actual full cage replacement option for an XPLR derailleur that isn't like a high-priced ceramic speed or something like that. Like this is really well priced. So, if you actually do tear off the cage assembly off a 12-speed Explore, this is a legitimate option. So, do consider it. All right, Brad. I think that is the end of this week's episode.
My pulse is racing. I'm so excited about all this stuff, Dave. I mean, do I have to wait another week?
Who knows what'll come next?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, let's see if we can break some embargoes now for next week. Oh, yeah. Okay. I can see what's coming. There's some new tech coming.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we got a couple.
And notably, Made is this weekend. So there's going to be a bunch of new tech coming out through that. We actually didn't even get to an exciting new titanium aero bike that has come from number 22, which is certainly worth looking out for. I think I'm going to write it up and cover it on Escape Collective, so head on over there because it is quite gorgeous. But yeah, next week we'll be catching up as a special episode, a bonus episode. I'll be catching up with Rob English to hear how Made went, what he had on display, what he saw as trends, other exciting bikes. I think that'll be a really interesting episode. And yeah, if you're a member, then you'll have access to the full thing. And if you're not a member, you'll be able to hear some of it. And Brad, I'll also catch up with you again. So
yeah, I'm really excited about Rob's feature. His frames alone are reason enough to go to that show just to see his own product. So it'll be cool to have his perspective too, going around and seeing what others are doing.
For sure.
Because he's so incredibly creative himself.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah. Absolutely looking forward to that. And keep an eye out for some of the coverage. And thanks for listening. And as a reminder, Geek Warning is a product of Escape Collective, and Escape Collective is wholly and solely funded by our members. So we work for our members, not for the industry. And if you believe in independent journalism and believe in clean functioning websites without advertising, stealing away from the content, or all of that, please consider supporting us. Head to escapecollective.com/member. And yeah, you can sign up and support what we do. Thank you. Thanks, Brad. Next week.
Thank you, Dave. I'll be here.
All right. I'll speak to you then.
Cheers.